what's the role of NATO in interstate conflicts related to weapons of mass destruction? Actually, this answer is quite simple, and I would have finalized my presentation within 30 seconds. NATO can play every role you imagine, but there are some preconditions, at least 2 or 3. The first precondition is you need a robust legal basis. For instance, a United Nations Security Council resolution. Secondly, you warned me I should not mention it, but you need an agreement among 28 nations. NATO is 28 nations, and we don't have a majority voting system. Every voice is equal, but perhaps some voices are more convincing. And thirdly, of course, NATO needs to have the required capabilities. You see the structure of my presentation on this slide, so I produced about 30 slides for 10 minutes. This means every 20 seconds a slide, but more. Some slides are more, all of the slides are not equally important. I would like to touch the agreed policies in NATO, and I jump a little bit in time because most important is the strategic concept, because the strategic concept covers the task of NATO. But then I would like to jump a little bit back in time to NATO's comprehensive strategic level policy for preventing the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and defending against chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear threats. So this is the official term, the headline for NATO's comprehensive policy. I have to bring this in every presentation at least once. And I would like to cover also the implementation of this policy, have a quick view on the latest summit, because the NATO summits are always the milestones, the cornerstones for NATO policy, because at these events the heads of state and governments of NATO's 28 member states are setting the scene. And I have a short conclusion. As has been mentioned already a couple of times, the security environment has been changed significantly, and I heard already, so it's a kind of, I feel also sometimes like an old man thing, these old times, and I experienced Mussolini, someone mentioned today, so I'm not that far that old or experienced, but the Cold War is over, and NATO assessed as the most significant threat against NATO security is the threat posed by terrorists. In its worst expression, posed by terrorists possessing weapons of mass destruction. What are NATO's core tasks? Well, they are written very clearly in the NATO strategic concept, which has been endorsed by the head of state and government at the 2010 NATO summit in Lisbon. So there is still collective defense related to Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. An armed attack against one NATO member has to be seen as an attack against all NATO members. We have crisis management. Crisis management operations are somehow nowadays very essential. For instance, NATO's maritime forces may play an important role. Their responsibilities can range from enforcing an arms embargo, which is definitely somehow non-proliferation event, but also to conduct maritime interdiction operation or to contribute to alliances, counterterrorism support. And perhaps getting much more important every single day, it's cooperative security. The engagement with partners helps to build regional security and stability, contributes to conflict prevention, and facilitates dialogue. These efforts also invite contact, positive interaction, and cooperation with other relevant actors in international activities, such as the United Nations and the European Union. The comprehensive policy covers also the part of proliferation. Don't ask me why, it differentiate between nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, so also, of course, chemical, biological, and radiological weapons and their means of delivery. NATO states crystal clear that we will further develop our capacities and capabilities to defend against the threat of civilian threats. I mentioned already two other topics of the comprehensive of the concept because they are similar important, because there's also the relation to the terrorism, but also to identify and train civilian specialists in this field. So that's the comprehensive approach, and so to speak, I'm somehow a living example of the comprehensive approach. As a soldier, I work for the international, in quotation marks, civilian staff of NATO. But I do this longer than the concept as well. Very important, I mentioned it already, the international cooperation. We like and we have to enhance the cooperation with the international organization. Honestly, not only to avoid duplication of efforts, but also supportive and to reduce costs. Main actors are the United Nations, and with this respect, the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, where we establish and maintain contact, but also the European Union. And since Brussels is hosting NATO as well as the European Union, it should be quite easy to cooperate, but there are still some obstacles sometimes. And of course, we like also to enhance the NATO-Russian cooperation. Our Secretary General, Mr. Rasmussen, spoke this year at the Munich Security Conference, and he mentioned, with a special focus to Russia, that NATO and Russia focus somehow the same challenges and should find the solutions for these challenges, with a special look at terrorism. The maritime issue is quite important because most of the communication line, the trade lines, are taking place at the oceans. So the maritime security became an increasing importance. So also in this Alliance Maritime Strategy, what sounds is related clearly to the strategic concept, but is slightly 5 months older, but use already the terminology of the concept. So we identified the need to for non-proliferation measures, and we should be capable to use maritime assets for this purpose as well. And I'll give you an example. There's one NATO operation ongoing. It's actually the only Article 5 operation. It's Operation Active Endeavour, followed by after September 11 in October 2011. And it's by its intention, it's not a counter-proliferation mission, it's a counter-terrorism mission, and we try to extend the mission on non-proliferation aspect, but I mentioned already we need therefore the agreement of 28 nations. We have had a couple of NATO summits. Some are more important than others for non-proliferation issues. Mostly important is the, and I'll speed up a little bit, it has been the Strasbourg Kehl summit in 2009, where for the very first time NATO endorsed a non-proliferation and civilian defense policy, with the aim to protect NATO's populations, territory and forces. This policy was a paradigm change, because up to then we were focused more or less on the recovery phase, just in case an attack with using weapons of mass destruction would have happened. We shifted now the focus to the prevention phase, and I like this slide very much. This would have been a nice picture. I can show you this one. So it's absolutely chaotic. You don't have to see it, but depicts the entire policy on one slide. So, identifying the stakeholders of non-proliferation cyber defense policy, the political, the military, and the civilian pillar. It identifies the areas we have to work, prevent, protect, recover, and it discovers and identifies other stakeholders like strategic communication, but also intelligence sharing and reach-back infusion. So this is, we need some IT support. At the Lisbon Summit in 2011, the heads of state and government tasked the North Atlantic Council to assess and to report to the North Atlantic Council how NATO can better counter the proliferation of WMD and its means of delivery. The comprehensive policy was, if you permit, a political paper, so a little bit cloudy. We had some problems with the implementation. So followed this task, we means the Committee on Proliferation, 28 nations supported by other committees and by the WMD Center, were tasked to report. We created a report which has been endorsed by the Ministers of Defense of all NATO members, containing 40 taskers, 40 very specific taskers to the Committee on Proliferation. So we tasked somehow ourselves, it's a nice way. But 36 out of these taskers were directed to the military authorities. The paper itself is classified. You see the structure of the paper here. It covers planning aspects, training and exercises, and operations and capabilities. And I started with a legal basis. So this is the one and only document which is up to now not agreed among 28. It's in developing phase. We hope to finalize this paper by the 26th of September. It's to identify legally available options for countering proliferation of WMD and related materials. So this gives us a basis then, on a NATO-agreed point of view, to act on non-proliferation tasks. The Chicago Summit this year is, I measure it this way because it's, some summits are more important than others, but the Chicago Summit highlighted one point which might be important for the discussion here as well. We had a defense and deterrence posture review which has been agreed by the nation, and there it's clearly mentioned first of all, and it's not always mentioned here, that we are going to reduce our capabilities, modernize them perhaps if needed, but as long as nuclear weapons exist, NATO will remain a nuclear alliance. So if you see if there's one side with nuclear weapons, then we might keep them as well. It's always the challenge of the first step. And of course the head of state and government, they stressed, emphasized again that we have to move forward with the implementation of the comprehensive policy. I'm coming now to my conclusion, and I'll give you an example going back to the 2002 summit. Mr. Welzer, I think you were very much involved at that time in this Prague capability commitments, where NATO introduced a NATO-owned, some way owned force for cyber defense. At the Prague Summit 2002, the nations identified some gap in NATO's cyber defense capabilities. This were the need for NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical, analytical laboratories, and this was the need for nuclear, biological, chemical event teams, advisory teams. So they became the combined joint cyber defense task force at the end, and this is one of another success story for NATO, because this is burden sharing. So in former times, every 6 months, now every year, we have a real multinational unit, force generated as a strategic asset for the Strategic Allied Commander Europe to act and react on CBN events. Also for instance, by pre-deploying this force to important high visibility events, like we did for the Olympics in Athens and for some summits as well. A minute? And these are some of the capabilities we are currently developing. These capabilities we are expanding and adding forensic capabilities. It's a kind also of deterrence that we will be able, just in case someone employed WMD, we can trace it back to the originator. And this, ladies and gentlemen, our future tasker, concludes my briefing. Thank you for your patience and thank you for your attention. I'm ready to answer the questions.